Ambassador Zilveth of the Karathi hegemony had served the Galactic Council for over 200 solar cycles, and in all that time she had never felt fear like this. The transmission had arrived on her personal console at exactly midnight, Galactic Standard Time, and she had read it 7 times before she believed it was real. The message was simple, almost casual, and that made it so much worse. "The new year is coming," it read. "There is no stopping it, sincerely. Earth." Zilveth's 4 hearts began to beat in an uneven rhythm as she stared at the words on her screen, and her clawed hands trembled as she reached for the emergency communication device that connected directly to the Galactic Council headquarters. Within 3 hours, every senior member of the Council had been awakened from their rest cycles and summoned to the Great Chamber on Station Prime, and the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. High Chancellor Morath stood at the central podium, his massive form casting shadows across the assembled delegates, and his bioluminescent frills flickered with colors that everyone in the room recognized as deep anxiety. "My fellow council members," he announced in a voice that echoed through the vast chamber, "we have received a transmission from the humans of Earth that requires our immediate attention." The holographic display behind him flickered to life, showing the words that had sent Zilveth into a panic, and a collective gasp rose from the gathered species. The Veltorians clicked their mandibles in distress. The Paraxians dimmed their flame bodies to almost nothing, and the ancient grandmother of the Silthine collective let out a low moan that seemed to shake the very walls. "They speak of this new year as if it is inevitable," Morath continued, his voice growing more troubled with each word. "Our best linguists have analyzed the phrase and found no match in any known database of weapons, diseases, natural disasters, or cosmic events." A delegate from the Morthax Union raised one of his 7 appendages and spoke in a quivering voice. "Perhaps it is a code word for something else. Something they do not wish us to understand." "That is precisely what concerns us," Morath replied, and his frills shifted to an even darker shade. "The humans have always been strange, have they not?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, and everyone present thought back to the day when humanity had first made contact with the galactic community just 8 solar cycles ago. They had arrived in ships that should not have been able to fly, powered by technology that defied logic and fueled by what the humans casually called hope and duct tape. They were too resilient, too adaptable, and far too cheerful in the face of challenges that would have broken any other species. When their colony on Mars had suffered a catastrophic failure, they had not despaired, but instead had thrown what they called a party to celebrate their survival. When a solar flare had nearly destroyed their communication network, they had laughed and said it was no big deal before rebuilding it in half the expected time. And now they were speaking of something called the New Year, something that was coming whether anyone wanted it to or not, and they were not asking for help or warning others to flee. They were celebrating its arrival. "We must speak with them directly," declared Voron, the senior analyst of the Galactic Intelligence Bureau. "We must demand an explanation for this transmission." Morath nodded his great head and turned to his assistant. "Contact Earth's ambassador immediately and summon her to this chamber." The message was sent, and the council waited in tense silence for a reply. And when it came, it only deepened their confusion and fear. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, the human representative to the Galactic Council, had sent back a response that was both polite and utterly terrifying. "Sorry," her message read, "but I cannot attend the council meeting at this time because we are all very busy preparing for the new year. And the new year waits for no one. I hope you understand." Morath read the message aloud, and for a long moment no one spoke, and then chaos erupted in the chamber. "They refused to negotiate," shouted the delegate from the Paraxian Flame Worlds, his body blazing with distress. "They are hiding something," cried another voice from the back of the room. "We must prepare for the worst." demanded the military commander of the Voltorian fleet. Zilveth watched the panic spread through the chamber, and she thought about everything she had learned about humans in the years since first contact. They were a young species, barely spacefaring, and yet they had achieved things that older and more advanced civilizations had never managed. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters of every kind, and they had not just survived but thrived. And now they were preparing for something they called the New Year, something so significant that their ambassador would not leave Earth to attend an emergency council meeting. What could possibly be so important? What could be coming that even the stubborn and resilient humans considered unstoppable? Morith raised his hands to quiet the crowd, and slowly the noise died down as everyone turned to face him. "We will not panic," he declared, though his voice betrayed his own fear. "We will gather information, we will analyze the situation, and we will determine the nature of this threat." He turned to Voron and spoke with as much authority as he could manage. "Mobilize the intelligence bureau and find out everything you can about this new year that the humans speak of." Voron bowed and hurried from the chamber, already calling orders to his agents through his communication device. "And as for the rest of us," Morith continued, looking out at the assembled delegates, "we will remain calm and await further information before taking any action." But even as he spoke those words, Zilveth could see the fear in his eyes, and she knew that everyone else could see it too. The humans had done many strange things since joining the galactic community, but this was different. This felt bigger, more significant, and far more dangerous than anything that had come before. Whatever the new year was, it was coming, and the humans seemed to believe that nothing in the universe could stop it. And that, Zilveth thought as she clutched her communication device with trembling claws, was the most terrifying thing of all. Senior Analyst Voron had not slept in 4 days, and his compound eyes were aching from staring at screens filled with human data. The Galactic Intelligence Bureau had launched its most ambitious operation in living memory, a full investigation into the mysterious phenomenon that the humans called the New Year. Thousands of agents have been deployed to intercept human communications, analyze their networks, and compile reports on everything they could find. And the findings were absolutely terrifying. Voron stood before the council once again, his thin frame trembling as he prepared to deliver his report, and every delegate in the chamber leaned forward with fear and anticipation. "High Chancellor," Voron began, his voice cracking with exhaustion and dread, "what we have discovered defies all reason and logic." He activated the holographic display, and images began to flash across the massive screen behind him. "The humans are stockpiling explosives," he announced, and gasps filled the chamber, massive quantities of them, enough to light up entire cities. The screen showed warehouses filled with colorful tubes and boxes, all labeled with words like fireworks and celebration-grade pyrotechnics. "But that is not all," Voron continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "They speak openly about dropping the ball on major population centers." The screen changed to show a massive glowing sphere suspended above a crowd of millions in a place called New York City. "We believe this ball may be some kind of weapon or signal device," Voron explained, "and the humans plan to deploy it at the exact moment the new year arrives." Delegate Kethra from the Morthax Union raised a trembling appendage. "Do we know when this event is supposed to occur?" "That is perhaps the most disturbing part," Voron replied, and he pulled up a new set of data. "The humans have been counting down to this moment for their entire orbital cycle," the screen filled with images of children in schools, all learning to count backwards from 10 in perfect unison. "They train their young from the earliest age," Voron said, his voice filled with horror, "teaching them to participate in a synchronized ritual that will occur at exactly midnight in each of their time zones." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and several of them made signs of protection, according to their various religious traditions. At the appointed hour, Voron continued, billions of humans will scream at the sky in unison. They will embrace one another as if saying goodbye. And they will consume massive quantities of fermented beverages. He paused to let this information sink in. And the silence in the chamber was deafening. We have analyzed this behavior pattern and can only conclude that it is either a mourning ritual for what they are about to lose, or a preparation for some kind of battle. High Chancellor Morath leaned forward, his frills now completely dark with worry. Have they done this before? Voron nodded slowly, and his next words sent a chill through every being in the room. They have done this every single orbital cycle since before recorded. Galactic history began. A cry of disbelief rose from the assembled delegates. That is impossible, shouted someone from the back of the chamber. And yet the evidence is clear, Voron replied, bringing up historical records that stretched back thousands of human years. They have been preparing for the new year for as long as their civilization has existed. Ambassador Zilva stood from her seat, her four hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and something that might have been awe. You were saying that the humans have known about this threat for thousands of years? Yes, Voron confirmed, and they have never tried to stop it. The chamber orbited into chaos once again, with delegates shouting over each other and demanding answers that no one could provide. Voron waited for the noise to die down before continuing with his report. We have developed several theories about what the new year might be. He brought up a new display showing various diagrams and charts. Theory 1 suggests that the new year is some kind of cosmic entity, perhaps a being of immense power that visits the human homeworld on a regular cycle. The screen showed artistic interpretations of a vast creature moving through space toward Earth. Theory 2 proposes that the new year is a natural disaster of some kind, perhaps a recurring event that the humans have learned to survive through their strange rituals. Images of storms and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions filled the display. Theory 3, and this is the one that I personally find most likely, Voron said, lowering his voice, is that the new year is some kind of deity that the humans worship. The chamber fell silent at this suggestion. Consider the evidence, Voron continued. They count down to its arrival with religious fervor. They make offerings of fire and light through their explosive displays. They consume ritual beverages. And they make promises to themselves, called resolutions, in which they vow to improve themselves before the next coming of the new year. He paused and looked around at the horrified faces of the council members. The humans have made peace with their god, he concluded, and they welcome its arrival each cycle rather than trying to fight against it. High Chancellor Morath rose slowly from his seat, his massive form seeming somehow smaller than before. What do you recommend we do? Voron hesitated before answering, and when he spoke his voice was barely audible. I recommend we double our military presence along the Sol System border. You believe we may need to defend ourselves? I believe we need to be prepared for anything, Voron replied. Because whatever the new year truly is, it has shaped human civilization for thousands of years. And a species that could survive such a thing is either incredibly resilient or incredibly dangerous. Morath nodded slowly. Then we will prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. He turned to address the full council. All member species are hereby ordered to place their defense forces on high alert. No vessels are to enter or exit the Sol System without authorization. And all communications with Earth are to be monitored and analyzed. The delegates began to file out of the chamber, each one carrying the weight of fear and uncertainty on their shoulders. But as Voron gathered his reports and prepared to return to his office, he could not shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The humans were strange, yes, and they did many things that defied explanation. But they had never shown hostility toward the galactic community, and they had always been willing to help when other species faced difficulties. Why would they suddenly become a threat now? What if the new year was not what they thought it was? But Voron pushed these doubts aside and focused on his duty, because the safety of the galaxy had to come first, and the humans had given them no reason to trust their strange behavior. The countdown was continuing, and soon the new year would arrive, and then everyone would finally learn the truth. High Chancellor Morith made a decision that no leader of the Galactic Council had ever made before. He would travel to Earth personally. His advisors begged him to reconsider, warning him that the human homeworld might not be safe, but Morith refused to listen. "If we are to understand this new year," he declared, "then we must see it with our own eyes." And so, on the 30th day of the human month called December, the Chancellor's diplomatic vessel descended through the clouds above the planet Earth. What Morith saw below him took his breath away. The entire planet seemed to be glowing with light. Every city sparkled like a jewel against the dark surface, with billions of tiny lights twinkling in patterns that seemed almost magical. "What is happening down there?" Morith asked his pilot, his voice filled with wonder and fear. "Unknown, High Chancellor," the pilot replied. "But our sensors detect no weapons fire or signs of conflict." They landed in a great open square in a city called London, and Morith stepped out of his vessel into a world that seemed to have gone completely mad. The air was cold, and small white flakes fell from the sky in a gentle dance that the humans called snow. But it was not the weather that made Morith's frills flicker with confusion. It was the humans themselves. They walked through the streets wearing strange hats shaped like cones, with sparkling decorations on their clothing and wide smiles on their faces. Some of them wore paper crowns as if they were royalty, while others carried noisemakers and small bottles of bubbling liquid. Music played from every direction, cheerful melodies that seemed designed to make people want to move and dance. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were signs and banners proclaiming the coming of the new year. Morith walked through the crowded streets with his guards, and the humans barely seemed to notice him, too busy with their preparations to pay attention to a 7-foot-tall alien. He stopped a young human female who was carrying a bag full of colorful decorations. "Excuse me, can you tell me what is happening here?" The woman looked up at him with bright eyes and an even brighter smile. "We are getting ready for the new year, of course." "Yes, but what exactly is the new year?" Morith pressed. "What is coming?" The woman laughed, and the sound was warm and joyful. "It is the start of a whole new cycle, a chance to begin again, a time to celebrate with friends and family and make promises for the future." She hurried away before Morith could ask any more questions, leaving him standing in the middle of the street feeling more confused than ever. He made his way to the human government building where Ambassador Vasquez had finally agreed to meet with him. And he found her office decorated with the same strange lights and ornaments that covered the rest of the city. "High Chancellor," Vasquez said as she rose to greet him, "I am honored that you came all this way. Though I wish you had chosen a different time, I had to come," Morith replied, taking a seat across from her desk. "The Council is deeply concerned about this New Year event, and we need answers." Vasquez nodded and poured 2 glasses of a golden liquid from a bottle on her desk. "I understand your concern, and I am sorry that we have not been more forthcoming with information." She handed 1 glass to Morith and raised her own. "But you have to understand that the new year is not easy to explain to someone who has never experienced it." "Then try," Morith said, not touching the drink, "because right now my people believe that you are preparing for either a disaster or an attack." Vasquez laughed, and once again Morith was struck by how the humans seemed to find joy in the strangest moments. "Neither," she said. "The new year is simply the end of one calendar cycle and the beginning of another. It is a moment when we pause to reflect on everything that has happened and look forward to everything that is yet to come." Morith frowned, his frills shifting to a puzzled shade. But our intelligence reports indicate that you are stockpiling explosives and training your children in synchronized rituals. Fireworks, Vasquez explained with a patient smile. We set them off to make the sky beautiful. And the counting down is just a way of building excitement for the moment when the new cycle begins. But why? Morith demanded. Why do you treat the passage of time as something to celebrate? Vasquez was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer and more thoughtful. Because time passes whether we celebrate it or not. High Chancellor. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering city below. Every year we lose things, she continued. People we love, opportunities we missed, dreams that did not come true. And every year, the universe reminds us that nothing lasts forever. She turned back to face him. And there was something in her eyes that Morith had never seen before in a human. But every year, we also gain things, she said. New friends, new experiences, new chances to do better than we did before. And the new year is when we honor both of those truths. Morith shook his head slowly, struggling to understand. You celebrate the fact that time is passing and everything you know will eventually end? We celebrate the fact that we are still here to see another cycle begin, Vasquez replied. We celebrate survival and hope and the chance to try again. She picked up her glass and raised it toward him. Tomorrow night, when the clock strikes midnight, billions of humans will look at each other and say two words that mean more than any others in our language. What words? Happy New Year, Vasquez said with a smile. It is a wish, a hope, a blessing, and a promise all wrapped up together. Morith stared at her for a long moment, and then he rose from his seat and turned toward the door. I must return to the council, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I must warn them. Warn them about what? Vasquez called after him. Morith paused at the door and looked back. That humanity is far more dangerous than we ever imagined. And then he was gone, hurrying through the celebrating crowds to his ship, his mind racing with everything he had learned. The humans did not fear the passage of time. They did not try to fight against it or escape from it. They embraced it, welcomed it, and found joy in its relentless march forward. And that, Morith thought as his ship lifted off into the night sky, was perhaps the most terrifying thing he had ever encountered. December 31st had arrived, and the entire galaxy held its breath. The Galactic Council had positioned observation platforms in orbit around Earth. Massive stations filled with sensors and recording equipment, and thousands of witnesses from every member species. Admiral Cirith of the Veltorian fleet stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the blue and green planet below with all 6 of her eyes. She had commanded warships in 3 major conflicts and had faced enemies that would have made lesser beings flee in terror. But she had never felt fear like this. Because tonight, the new year would arrive. Status report, she demanded, her claws clicking against the armrest of her command chair. All weapons are charged and ready. Admiral, her tactical officer replied, shields are at maximum strength. And our fighter squadrons are standing by for immediate launch. What about the planet's surface? The officer pulled up a holographic display showing Earth from multiple angles. Every major population center appears to be gathering large crowds, Admiral. And our sensors are detecting massive stockpiles of the explosive devices. Throughout urban areas, Admiral Cirith watched as millions of tiny lights began to move across the planet. Humans traveling to be with their friends and families for what might be the final hours. They are preparing to face it together, she murmured. And despite herself, she felt a grudging respect for these strange creatures. High Chancellor Morith's voice crackled through the communication system. Admiral, this is the Chancellor speaking from Station Prime. I want all forces to remain on high alert, but take no offensive action unless the humans strike first. Understood. High Chancellor, Cirith replied. but may I ask what exactly we are expecting to happen?" There was a long pause before Morath answered. "Honestly, Admiral, I have no idea. But I suspect we are about to witness something that will change the way we think about humanity forever." The hours crept by with agonizing slowness, and all across the galaxy beings watched and waited and wondered what the night would bring. On Earth, the celebrations were reaching a fever pitch. In Sydney, Australia, the first major city to reach midnight, crowds had gathered around the famous harbor, their faces turned toward the sky. The council observers watched in fascination as the humans began to count down from 10, their voices rising in a unified chant that seemed to shake the very air. 10, 9, 8. Admiral Sirith gripped her armrest tighter, her claws leaving marks in the metal. 7, 6, 5. On Station Prime, High Chancellor Morath closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. 4, 3, 2. Every sensor on every observation platform locked onto the harbor, waiting for something terrible to emerge from the darkness. 1. And then the sky exploded. Colors burst across the night, massive blooms of red and gold and green and blue that painted the clouds with light. The sound reached the orbital platforms a moment later, a thunderous crackling that made several observers cry out in alarm. But it was not an attack. It was not a weapon. It was beauty, pure and simple, a display of light and color that served no purpose except to make people smile. Admiral Sirith watched with her mouth hanging open as the humans below began to embrace each other, crying and laughing and kissing. Music swelled through the streets, and people danced and sang and shouted 2 words over and over again. "Happy New Year! Happy New Year! Happy New Year!" And then it was over. The fireworks faded, the crowds began to disperse, and Earth continued to spin on its axis as if nothing had happened. "What was that?" Sirith whispered, her voice barely audible. "The New Year, Admiral," her tactical officer replied, sounding just as stunned. "I believe that was the New Year, but it was not over." Not really, because the planet had many time zones, and midnight would arrive in each one throughout the night. The council observers watched in growing amazement as the celebration moved around the planet like a wave. Tokyo erupted in light an hour after Sydney, then Beijing, then Moscow, then Paris, then London, each city marking the moment with its own unique display of fire and color. And everywhere, the humans embraced each other and smiled and cried and laughed. When midnight finally reached New York City, the largest celebration of all began. Millions of humans had packed themselves into a place called Times Square, standing shoulder to shoulder in the freezing cold, their eyes fixed on a massive glowing bowl suspended above the crowd. High Chancellor Morath watched from his observation post, remembering the intelligence reports about dropping the ball and wondering what would happen next. The countdown began, millions of voices joining together in perfect unison. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The ball descended slowly toward the Earth, and when it reached the bottom, the crowd erupted in the loudest cheer Morath had ever heard. Confetti rained down from the sky, catching the light and sparkling like diamonds. Couples kissed, strangers hugged, and everyone sang a song that the translators identified as something called Auld Lang Syne. And then, just like in Sydney and Tokyo and every other city, the celebration began to wind down. People went home to their families, the streets were cleaned, and life continued as if the new year had always been there waiting for them. Admiral Sirith lowered her weapons and dismissed her fighter squadrons, feeling foolish and confused and strangely moved all at the same time. They were not preparing for battle, she said quietly. They were not mourning their destruction. Then what were they doing? Her tactical officer asked. Sirith thought about everything she had witnessed, the joy and the tears and the embraces and the promises. "I think," she said slowly, "they were celebrating being alive, on Station Prime. High Chancellor Morth stood alone in his observation room, watching the last fireworks fade over the Pacific Ocean. He had come to Earth expecting to witness a catastrophe, and instead, he had witnessed something far more profound. The humans had faced the passage of time, the inevitable march toward entropy and endings, and they had responded not with fear or despair, but with defiance. They had thrown a party. They had made the darkness beautiful. And somehow, impossibly, they had turned the simple act of surviving another year into a celebration that united their entire species. "What are you humans?" Morth whispered to the planet below. What kind of beings face the void with joy instead of terror? He did not have an answer, not yet. But he knew that tomorrow he would return to the council and tell them what he had seen. And he suspected that nothing would ever be quite the same again. 3 days after the new year had arrived on Earth, High Chancellor Morth sat in the great chamber of the Galactic Council and tried to find the words to explain what he had witnessed. The assembly hall was packed with delegates from every member species, all of them eager to hear his report on the mysterious human event that had caused so much panic and confusion. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the visitors' gallery, watching with a small smile on her face as Morth struggled to begin his speech. "My fellow council members," Morth finally said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "I have traveled to Earth. I have spoken with the humans, and I have witnessed their New Year celebration with my own eyes." He paused, and his bioluminescent frills flickered through a dozen different colors as he searched for the right words. "And I must tell you that everything we believed was wrong." A murmur rippled through the assembly, and delegates leaned forward in their seats. "The New Year is not a weapon," Morth continued. "It is not a disaster, it is not a god, and it is not a threat to the galaxy." "Then what is it?" demanded Delegate Kethra from the Morthax Union, his 7 appendages waving with impatience. "It is a moment," Morth replied. "Nothing more and nothing less. It is the moment when one cycle ends and another begins. When the humans pause to acknowledge that time has passed and that they are still here to witness it." He turned to look at Ambassador Vasquez, and she nodded encouragingly. "They celebrate it," Morth said, and his voice filled with wonder. "They gather together with their loved ones. They light up the sky with fire and color, and they embrace each other with joy and gratitude." "But why?" asked Admiral Sirith, who had been invited to attend the session. "Why would any species celebrate the passage of time when time brings only decay and death?" Morth gestured toward the visitors' gallery. "Perhaps the ambassador can explain it better than I can." Vasquez rose from her seat and made her way down to the central podium, and every eye in the chamber followed her. She was small by galactic standards, barely reaching Morth's chest even when standing at her full height, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. "High Chancellor Morth has asked me to explain why humans celebrate the new year," she began, her voice clear and strong. "And I will do my best to help you understand." She paused and looked around at the assembled delegates, taking in their curious and confused faces. "You are right that time brings decay and death," she said. "Every human knows this from the moment they are old enough to understand such things. We are a mortal species with short lifespans, and we know that everything we build and everyone we love will eventually fade away." She smiled, and there was something bittersweet in the expression. "But we have learned that this knowledge can be a gift rather than a curse." The delegates murmured in confusion, and Vasquez raised her hand to quiet them. "When you know that time is limited, every moment becomes precious," she explained. "Every sunrise is a miracle. Every laugh is a treasure. Every embrace is a reminder that we are alive and connected to each other." She turned to face Morth directly. "You asked me once why we celebrate our doom, and I told you that we celebrate survival. But I think I can give you a better answer now." "Please," Morth said, his frills glowing with curiosity. "We celebrate because the universe does not care about us," Vasquez said, and her words hung in the air like a challenge. "The stars do not know our names. Time does not pause for our grief. And entropy marched forward regardless of our hopes and dreams." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with fierce pride. "But we care about each other, and that is what the new year is really about." She gestured toward the massive windows that looked out on the stars beyond. "Every cycle, the universe reminds us that we are small and temporary and insignificant," she continued. "And every cycle, we respond by gathering together and declaring that we matter anyway. We light fires in the darkness because we refuse to be forgotten. We embrace strangers because loneliness is a choice we do not have to make. We make resolutions because we believe we can become better than we are. And we wish each other a happy new year because hope is the most human thing of all." The chamber was silent, and Vasquez let her words settle before continuing. "You see, the new year is not something that happens to us," she said. "It is something we choose. Every cycle, we choose to hope, we choose to try again. We choose to believe that tomorrow might be better than today." She looked around at the assembled delegates one last time. "That is what it means to be human," she concluded. "We do not negotiate with time. We do not surrender to entropy. And we do not accept that the darkness has to win. We toast to the passing of another year. And then we get back to living." She raised an imaginary glass toward the council. "And if any of you would like to join us for next year's celebration, you are more than welcome. Because the new year belongs to everyone who chooses to embrace it." The silence stretched for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. Senior Analyst Voron, the same being who had once theorized that the new year was a god, rose from his seat and began to make a sound that the translators struggled to interpret. It was applause, the first time a Karathi had ever made such a gesture. Others joined in, each species expressing appreciation in their own way, until the great chamber was filled with a symphony of clicks and whistles and rumbles and cheers. High Chancellor Morith stepped forward and extended his massive hand toward the small human ambassador. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing us something we had forgotten." "What is that?" Vasquez asked, taking his hand. "That facing the void with courage is admirable," Morris replied, his frills glowing with a new understanding. "But facing it with joy is something else entirely." He smiled, and it was the first time Vasquez had ever seen that expression on a member of his species. "It is something we would like to learn." Vasquez grinned and squeezed his hand. "Then I have just 2 words for you, High Chancellor." "What words?" "Happy New Year." And in that moment, something shifted in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. The humans were still strange, still unpredictable, still far too cheerful in the face of adversity. But they were no longer simply allies or curiosities or potential threats. They were teachers, and the lesson they had to offer was one that the galaxy had needed to learn for a very long time. The universe was vast and cold and indifferent, but that did not mean the beings who lived in it had to be. And perhaps, just perhaps, the best response to an uncaring cosmos was not fear or despair or resignation. Perhaps it was fireworks and music and the sound of billions of voices declaring together that they were still here, still hoping, still ready to try again. Perhaps the best response was joy,